The desert does not keep secrets. It merely waits for the witnesses to die. Beneath the shifting orange dunes of southern Iraq, where the heat distortion turns the horizon into a shimmering liquid, lies the ghost of a world that was never supposed to end. We are told by the quiet voices in wood-paneled universities that civilization began here as a slow, upward climb, a steady progression from the mud brick to the stars. They point to the Sumerians as the diligent children of the Tigris and Euphrates, the first to count the hours, the first to write the laws, the first to look at the night sky and see gods instead of chaos. But the dust tells a different story. It tells a story of a sudden, shattering silence that fell over the world in the year 2000 BC. It speaks of a light that was too bright to be the sun and a wind that was too cold to be the breath of the desert. If you listen to the broken clay, you realize that the history we have been taught is not a record of progress, but a carefully curated amnesia. We are the inheritors of an abandoned estate, wandering through rooms we no longer understand, looking at shadows on the walls and calling them myths. The orthodox view of the Anunnaki is one of distant, metaphorical figures, archetypes of the human psyche carved into stone. To the modern historian, Enlil and Enki are merely the personifications of the storm and the water, poetic masks worn by a primitive people to make sense of a volatile environment. But when you hold the cuneiform tablets in your hands, when you feel the weight of the lamentation over the destruction of UR, the metaphor dissolves. The text does not read like a prayer. It reads like an evacuation order. It is a haunting, visceral account of a departure that was never intended to be peaceful. The scribes of UR did not write about gods who had grown tired of their creation or gods who were testing the faith of their followers. They wrote about gods who were afraid. They wrote about the great protectors, the eternal guardians who had walked the streets of Eridu and Nippur for millennia, suddenly fleeing their homes like birds of a nest. There is a specific, jagged terror in the words. They describe the smoke that choked the temples and the fire that dissolved the very soul of the land. This was not a change of administration. This was a desertion. Consider the year 2000 BC. Across the globe, the great gears of human development did not just stall. They broke. In the Indus Valley, cities were abandoned overnight. In the Levant, the earth itself seemed to turn to salt. And in Sumer, the cradle of all we know, the kingship was recorded to have left the earth for the final time. For thousands of years, the list of kings had been a continuous thread, a biological and political lineage that traced its authority back to the stars. And then the thread was cut. The records go silent. The great administrative machines of the temple complexes grind to a halt. We are told this was due to climate change, or perhaps a nomadic invasion of the Gudians and the Amorites. We are told it was a series of unfortunate geopolitical events. But the lamentation of UR speaks of a storm of fire that did not come from the swords of men. It speaks of an evil wind that moved across the land, a wind that did not bring rain or sand, but a sickness that turned the skin to ash and the water to poison. It was a wind that the gods themselves could not stop. In fact, they were the first to run from it. The orthodox narrative struggles to explain the suddenness of it all. Why would a civilization at the height of its technical and cultural power simply evaporate? Why would the gods, who had built the irrigation systems that turned a wasteland into a garden, suddenly allow the canals to choke with silt? The answer lies not in the failure of the people, but in the calculated withdrawal of the architects. For centuries, the Anunnaki had functioned as the central nervous system of human society. They were the ones who held the me, the mysterious, technical data storage disks that contained the blueprints for everything from weaving to high-level governance, from metallurgy to the secrets of the heavens. These were not abstract concepts. They were physical objects. They were described as humming with a faint, inner light, objects that could be stolen, lost, or deactivated. And around 2000 BC, the references to the me vanish from the record entirely. It is as if the planet's hard drive was wiped clean. The digital soul of Sumer was extracted, and the people were left with the hardware of a civilization they no longer knew how to operate. To understand the panic of that era, we must look at the sky through the eyes of the witness. Tablet K.8538, often called the Planisphere, is an artifact that has baffled the mainstream for decades. Found in the ruins of the Royal Library at Nineveh, it is a circular clay disc, a star chart that should not exist in the hands of a primitive culture. It does not just map the constellations. It records the precise trajectory of a massive celestial object moving across the sky. Scientific analysis of the markings suggests that the scribe was tracking a comet or an asteroid of immense proportions, an object that intersected with the Earth's orbit at a time that aligns perfectly with the Great Abandonment. The Planisphere is a record of an incoming disaster, a countdown etched in clay. It tells us that the Anunnaki were not guessing. They were not watching the omens in the entrails of sheep. They had the sensors. They had the vantage point of the high places. They saw the debris field coming long before the first spark hit the atmosphere. The mainstream would have us believe that the gods left because their mission was complete, that they had raised humanity to a level of self-sufficiency and then returned to their celestial home in a moment of triumph. But the archaeological record is not one of triumph. It is one of wreckage. The image of the giant craft seen in the sky during those final days, depicted in cylinder seals and described in the hymns, is often portrayed as a chariot of glory. But look closer. Look at the way the texts describe the departure. There is no celebration. There is only the fire that fell from the sky and the shadow that covered the sun. The craft was not a parade float. It was a life raft. It was a strategic desertion by an elite class of beings who realized that their biological existence on this planet was no longer viable. They were the masters of the Earth, yes, but they were also its prisoners, bound by a biology that was refined and advanced, yet tragically fragile. The radical truth that the dust whispers is that the Anunnaki did not leave us because they were done with us. They left because the Earth had entered a lethal phase of its great precessional cycle. Our planet does not move through space in a peaceful, empty void. It wobbles on its axis, a slow 26,000-year grind that takes us through different sectors of the galactic neighborhood. And every so often, that wobble brings us into a debris field, a region of space thick with the remnants of ancient collisions, a place where the sun's stability flickers and the tectonic plates of the Earth begin to scream. The Anunnaki, with their deep time perspective, knew the clock was ticking. They knew that the Golden Age was merely a window of atmospheric calm that was about to slam shut. Their high-tech sensors, the same ones that powered the Me and the Great Ziggurats, detected an impending solar tectonic event. They saw the meteors. They felt the magnetic field thinning. And they realized that if they stayed, they would burn with the sheep. So they made a choice. It was a choice of cold, calculated survival. The exodus was not for everyone. It was for the few. The lamentation describes Enlil and Ninlil watching from above as their city was consumed. Can you imagine the view from that craft? Looking down at the geometry of UR, the city you designed, the people you bred, the culture you cultivated, and seeing it all turn into a charcoal smudge on the surface of the world. They didn't leave because they were cruel. They left because they were efficient. They understood that the physical infrastructure of their empire was replaceable, but their own genetic continuity was not. They retreated to the Deep Abzu, a term that has been misinterpreted as the watery abyss, but which more likely refers to a state of orbital or subterranean stasis. They went into the dark to wait out the 1,000-year storm. And what of us? What of the sheepfolds left behind? The theory of the biological buffer suggests a darker purpose for our continued existence. If the gods knew the fire was coming, why didn't they take us with them? Why leave the mutated DNA of humanity to fend for itself in the ruins? Perhaps we were never meant to be the inheritors of the Earth. Perhaps we were meant to be the test subjects. By leaving humanity behind to face the evil wind and the radiation of a dying age, the Anunnaki were conducting the ultimate experiment in resilience. They believed that if any part of the human project survived the fire, the survivors would emerge with a DNA that was more rugged, more resistant to the harsh realities of a changing planet. We were left to be forged in the kiln of disaster, so that when the cycle turned again, when the debris field was past and the sun grew quiet, they could return to a world already repopulated by a workforce that had learned to survive on nothing but dust and memory. The silence that followed 2000 BC is the most profound piece of evidence we have. It is the sound of a world that has been stripped of its masters. The Great Ziggurats, which once served as the grounding points for the gods' technology, became nothing more than piles of sun-dried brick, lonely monuments to a power that had vanished. The people who remained tried to mimic the old ways. They tried to keep the calendars, they tried to perform the rituals, but the spark was gone. They were like children playing with the discarded tools of a master craftsman, wondering why the stone would no longer sing. The history of the last 4,000 years is the history of that mimicry. We have built our civilizations on the foundations of their abandonment, never realizing that the ceiling above us is not the sky, but the floor of the room they left. The scent of ozone that lingers in the ancient texts is not just a poetic flourish. It is the sensory memory of a high-energy event that the human nervous system was never meant to witness. When the scribes wrote of the storm that does not pass, they were describing a breakdown of the atmospheric shield, a moment when the cosmic and the terrestrial collided. The evil wind was likely a radioactive fallout, a byproduct of the celestial object recorded in tablet K.8538, or perhaps the result of the gods' own propulsion systems as they tore themselves away from the Earth's gravity in a desperate last-minute ascent. The dissolving of the soul of the land is a description of a total systemic collapse, where the very chemistry of the soil and the water was altered by a force that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge because it does not fit the slow, uniformitarian model of history. But the Earth remembers. It remembers in the layers of vitrified sand found in the deserts, sand that has been turned to glass by a heat that no lightning strike could produce. It remembers in the sudden genetic bottlenecks that appear in the human lineage, moments where our population was winnowed down to a handful of survivors. These are the scars of the great abandonment. We are the descendants of the ones who were not worth saving, the ones who were left to the debris field, while the elites slept in their silver cocoons in the Abzu. We are the biological buffer, the resilient mutation, the tough, scarred tissue of a planet that has been through the fire. And yet, there is a haunting beauty in this betrayal, because the gods, in their cold calculations, underestimated the human spirit. They expected us to be a buffer, a temporary placeholder for their eventual return. They did not expect us to remember. They did not expect us to take the broken pieces of their me and try to build our own version of the stars. They did not expect us to turn their abandonment into a theology of hope, waiting for a return that may never come, or that may come in a form they no longer recognize. We have turned the desertion into a mystery, and the mystery has given us a reason to keep digging. As we look at the ruins of UR today, we are not just looking at an ancient city. We are looking at a crime scene where the perpetrators are long gone and the evidence has been buried by time. The kingship that descended from heaven is a ghost story that we tell ourselves to explain why we feel so out of place on this planet. We feel like foreigners in our own home because we are the offspring of a world that was supposed to end 4,000 years ago. We are the glitch in the God's plan. The Anunnaki fled to the Deep Abzu to wait out the 1,000-year storm, but they left the lights on in our DNA, and we have been wandering the halls of the abandoned estate ever since, looking for the keys to the rooms they locked before they left. The deep time of the Earth is a series of erasures. Each cycle of the precession wipes the slate clean, turning the steel to rust and the stone to sand. We are currently living in the brief, flickering light of another golden age. Another window of calm before the wobble brings us back to the debris. The censors of the gods would be screaming right now, but they are not here to read them. Or perhaps they are. Perhaps the Deep Abzu is closer than we think. Perhaps the stasis is ending, and the guardians are waking up to see what has become of their buffer. They would find a world that has grown loud, a world that has learned to harness the fire they left behind. They would find a humanity that is no longer a sheepfold, but a global civilization that is starting to look back at the stars with a questioning, suspicious gaze. The lamentation over the destruction of UR ends with a plea for the gods to return, for the evil wind to cease, and for the life of the city to be restored. It is a heartbreaking document of a people who did not yet realize they were alone. They thought the abandonment was a temporary punishment, a divine tantrum that would eventually subside. They did not realize that the gods were not angry. They were just gone. They were already in the cold dark, watching the earth recede, watching the fires of 2000 BC flicker out like dying embers. The Great Abandonment was the birth of the modern world, the moment when humanity was forced to look to itself for survival. It was a brutal, bloody birth, but it was the only way we could ever become more than a workforce for an extraterrestrial elite. We must accept the scientific friction of our past. We must look at the anomalies, the planisphere, the vitrified ruins, the missing me, and realize that they are not outliers. They are the core of the story. The mainstream view is a comfort blanket, a way to keep the dark at bay. But the dark is where the truth lives. It is in the forbidden investigation into our lost past that we find the coordinates for our future. We are the survivors of a cosmic catastrophe that was witnessed, recorded, and then strategically ignored by those who were supposed to protect us. The Anunnaki exodus was the ultimate betrayal, but it was also the ultimate gift, the freedom of the abandoned. As the sun sets over the ruins of Eridu, the long shadows of the mounds seem to reach out toward the stars. There is a weight to the air here, a sense of something heavy and ancient that is still pressing down on the soil. It is the weight of the thousands of years that have been erased, the weight of the millions of lives that were lived and lost in the shadow of the great abandonment. We are the echoes of that time, the rhythmic, melodic pulse of a species that refused to go extinct. The fire fell from the sky, the wind turned to poison, and the gods fled their nests, but we are still here. We are the dust that learned to speak, and we are finally ready to tell the story of the day the heavens went silent. The narrative of the Anunnaki has been sanitized over the millennia, turned into a fable of divine intervention and celestial hierarchy. But the core of the experience was one of raw, unadulterated desertion. The texts describe Enlil and Ninlil not as majestic rulers, but as panicked refugees. They did not walk out of their temples with dignity. They fled. The storm of fire was not a symbol of their power, but a manifestation of their failure to control the environment they had colonized. They had mastered the genetics of the human form, they had mastered the architecture of the ziggurat, but they had not mastered the erratic heart of the solar system. When the great precessional cycle turned, and the debris field loomed, they realized they were just as vulnerable as the black-headed people they ruled. The only difference was that they had the means to leave. Imagine the atmosphere in the inner sanctums of the temples as the realization set in. The me disks, those repositories of all knowledge, flickering and going dark as the planetary magnetic field began to buckle. The priests, who had spent their lives serving the gods, suddenly finding the doors to the Holy of Holies locked from the inside. The sound of the great craft warming up, a vibration that rattled the very foundations of the city, a sound that the people mistook for thunder. And then the ascent, the blinding light that scorched the eyes of anyone who looked up. The kingship leaving the earth, not in a cloud of glory, but in a plume of ozone and superheated air. The people below would have fallen to their knees, waiting for the blessing that would never come. They were waiting for a word of comfort, a sign that they would be protected. But the only sign was the receding point of light in the sky and the encroaching darkness of the evil wind. The evil wind is described as a ghost that clambers over the walls, a force that fills the streets with the dead. It was a silent killer. It didn't break the walls of the houses. It just removed the life from within them. This is the hallmark of a high-energy, radioactive event. In 2000 BC, the world didn't end with a bang, but with a lingering, toxic sigh. The gods had known it was coming. They had seen the trajectory on the planisphere. They knew that the witness, tablet K.8538, was not a record of a miracle, but a record of a collision course. They chose to save themselves. They chose to preserve their fragile biology at the expense of the civilization they had built. This is the strategic desertion. It was a cold, mathematical calculation. If they stayed, the Anunnaki would have suffered genetic degradation, perhaps even extinction. By leaving, they preserved the pure line of the gods, leaving the mutated human DNA to deal with the fallout. This mutated DNA is us. We are the children of the fallout. Our biology is the result of 4,000 years of adaptation to a world that was left in ruins. We are more resilient, more aggressive, and more capable of surviving in a harsh environment than the gods ever were. They were the hothouse flowers of the universe, requiring specific conditions and constant maintenance to thrive. We are the weeds that grew through the cracks in their pavement. And this, perhaps, was their intention all along. The biological buffer theory suggests that we were never the end goal. We were the backup plan. We were the redundancy in the system. If the Anunnaki return, they won't find the submissive workforce they left behind. They will find a species that has been tempered by the debris field, a species that has learned to live in the fire they feared. The silence of the archaeological record around 2000 BC is not a mystery. It is a scream that has been muffled by time. The sudden silence of the me is the most telling evidence of all. For centuries, the Sumerian texts are obsessed with these disks, these physical objects that granted the power of civilization. And then they are gone. No one mentions them. No one claims to have them. It is as if the power was unplugged. The gods didn't just leave. They took the batteries with them. They left us the empty shells of their cities, the hollow husks of their rituals, and a collective trauma that we have been trying to process for 40 centuries. We call it the fall. We call it the loss of Eden. But it was simply the great abandonment. The Deep Abzu is not a myth. It is a location. Whether it is a high Earth orbit, a lunar stasis chamber, or a deep crust sanctuary, it is the place where the elite of the Anunnaki retreated to wait out the cycle. They are waiting for the Earth to return to a state of atmospheric and magnetic stability. They are waiting for the golden age to return. But they have forgotten that while they slept in their stasis, the world changed. The sheepfolds they left behind have built their own ziggurats, of steel, of glass, of silicon. We have created our own me, our own repositories of knowledge that don't depend on their light. When they wake up, they will realize that the biological buffer has grown into something they can no longer control. The lamentation of Ur ends with the gods Enlil and Ninlil fleeing their nest, like birds. It is a vivid, sensory image that captures the cowardice of the Exodus. They didn't stand and fight the evil wind. They didn't use their advanced technology to shield the people. They ran. And in their running, they revealed their true nature. They were not eternal guardians. They were occupants. They were landlords who saw the building was on fire and grabbed their valuables before heading for the exit. The history of the forgotten earth is the story of the tenants who stayed behind to put out the fire with their bare hands. As we look back at tablet K.8538, the witness of the ancient sky, we realize that we are looking at a map of our own abandonment. The trajectory of the object is a line drawn through the heart of our history, a line that separates the era of the gods from the era of man. On one side of that line, we were the children of the Anunnaki. On the other side, we were the orphans of the earth. The Exodus was the moment we were forced to grow up, to face the debris field alone. It was the moment the kingship became a memory and survival became a mandate. The textures of the ancient world are still there, if you know where to look. They are in the vitrified stones of the ruins, stones that feel unnaturally heavy, as if they are still holding the radiation of the evil wind. They are in the blood of gods diluted by time that flows through our own veins, a genetic memory of a power we once possessed and then lost. We are the descendants of the survivors, the ones who didn't just witness the destruction, but who lived through it. Our history is not a record of progress. It is a record of endurance. In the end, the story of the Anunnaki Exodus is a philosophical one. It asks us what we owe to our creators and what they owe to us. If they left us to die in the fire of 2000 BC, do they have a right to return? If they treated us as a biological buffer, a disposable layer of protection for their own fragile existence, do we still owe them the title of gods? Or are we the true masters of the earth, the ones who earned our right to this planet by surviving the storm they could not face? The dust of Sumer is silent, but it is a silence that demands an answer. The desert does not keep secrets. It merely waits. And as the great precessional cycle turns once more, as the wobble of the earth brings us closer to the next debris field, we must wonder if the gods are watching. Are they preparing for their homecoming? Or are they waiting to see if we will survive the next fire? The Deep Abzu is quiet, for now, but the witness is still etched in clay, a reminder of the day the heaven was torn open and the keepers of the earth fled. We are the forgotten Earth, the ones who were left behind, the ones who turned the abandonment into a civilization. And whatever comes next, we will face it with the strength of a species that has already survived the end of the world. The air in the museum basement tastes of stale time and pulverized stone. Here, away from the tourists and the sunlight, the fragments of the past are kept in sterile drawers, each one a piece of a puzzle that we are told is already solved. But as you trace the jagged lines of a broken cylinder seal, you feel a scientific friction, a resistance to the easy explanations. The mainstream tells us that these artifacts are the product of religious fervor, a desperate attempt by a primitive people to appease the capricious elements. But there is a technical precision in these carvings that belies such a simple view. The way they depict the chariots of the sun with mechanical consistency, the way they record the movements of planets that should have been invisible to the naked eye. This wasn't religion. This was documentation. Consider the me once more. These were not just concepts of law or culture. In the oldest texts, they are described as being kept in a leather bag or a shining box. They were objects that could be physically handled, moved, and, most importantly, lost. When Inanna steals the me from Enki, the story is often treated as a myth about the transfer of power from one city to another. But read the descriptions of the me themselves. They are categorized. There are me for the art of the smith, me for the art of the scribe, me for the kindling of fire, and me for the descent into the underworld. This sounds less like a collection of myths and more like a library of technical manuals or software modules. If the Anunnaki were the administrators of Earth, the me were the tools of their trade. And when the Exodus began, they didn't leave the tools behind for the locals. They wiped the servers. The sudden silence of 2000 BC is the sound of a total digital evacuation. Imagine a modern city where the internet, the power grid, and every piece of computerized machinery suddenly stopped working. The buildings would still be there. The people would still be there. But the soul of the city, the system that allows it to function at a high level, would be gone. That is what happened to Sumer. The kingship was the administrative authority, and when it ascended to heaven, it took the operating system with it. The people were left with the mud bricks and the irrigation canals, but they no longer had the me to tell them how to maintain the complex hydraulic systems or how to calculate the seasonal shifts with precision. They were plummeted from a high-tech golden age into a dark age of manual labor and tribal warfare. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur describes this collapse with heartbreaking clarity. It says the canals are choked with weeds, the fields produce no grain, and the mother does not look after her child. This wasn't just the result of a bad harvest. This was a systemic failure of a managed society. The Anunnaki had acted as the stabilizing force, the middle managers who kept the gears of the world turning. When they left, the gears began to grind against each other until they shattered. The evil wind that followed was the final blow, an environmental catastrophe that the gods saw coming and chose not to prevent. We are told that tablet K.8538 is a mystery, a pseudoscientific interpretation of a simple star map. But the mainstream science of the 19th and 20th centuries was built on the assumption that ancient people were less capable than we are. They couldn't imagine a civilization that had mastered the stars 4,000 years ago. Yet, the planisphere tracks an object that doesn't follow the regular patterns of the planets. It tracks something incoming, something fast. The sensory details in the lamentation describe the fire that dissolved the soul of the land, a heat so intense that it felt as if the very essence of the world was being pulled apart. This isn't the language of a poet. It is the language of someone witnessing a high-energy plasma event or a massive atmospheric friction. The Anunnaki were not from here. Their biology, though they shared much of it with us through their genetic engineering projects, was tuned to a different environment. They were long-lived, yes, but they were also susceptible to the fluctuations of the Earth's magnetic field. To them, the debris field wasn't just a threat to their cities. It was a threat to their immortality. The radiation from a thinning atmosphere or a solar flare could damage their DNA in ways that their advanced medicine couldn't repair. They were fragile in the sense that they had more to lose. We, the biological buffer, were built to be disposable. We were the short-lived ones, the ones whose generations turned over so quickly that we could adapt to the changing environment through sheer Darwinian pressure. They couldn't. They had to leave or they would have become us. The strategic desertion was a betrayal of the highest order, but it was also a masterpiece of long-term planning. By retreating to the Deep Abzu, the orbital sanctuaries or the subterranean vaults where the evil wind could not reach, they ensured their own survival. They left us to face the fire, knowing that the survivors would be the strongest, the most resilient, the most capable of rebuilding. We were the mutated DNA that would pave the way for their eventual return. They didn't want to rule a graveyard. They wanted to rule a world that had been processed by the debris field and made ready for their reemergence. This is the forbidden investigation. This is the truth that the forgotten earth hides beneath its layers of silt and sand. We are not the crown of creation. We are the survivors of an abandoned project. We are the leftovers of an exodus. And as we look up at the night sky today, we aren't just looking at stars. We are looking for the return of the life rafts. We are looking for the masters who left us to burn, and who might be surprised to find that we didn't just survive, we thrived. We turned the evil wind into the breath of our own ambitions. We turned the silence of the me into the roar of our own technology. The rhythmic pulse of the desert wind sounds like a heartbeat if you listen long enough. It is the heartbeat of a planet that has seen empires rise and fall, gods come and go. The Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people, a term that suggests they saw themselves as a distinct, perhaps created, group. They knew they were the sheep, and they knew who the shepherds were. But when the shepherds flee the flock because the wolves are at the gate, the sheep must learn to become wolves themselves. That is the story of the last 4,000 years. We have learned to fight, to build, to survive without the guidance of the me. We have grown claws and teeth in the shadow of the abandonment. The lamentation of you are is not a prayer for help. It is a testament to the moment the gods failed. It is the most honest document in human history. It doesn't sugarcoat the betrayal. Says Enlil left his city. Says Ninlil left her city. Says they fled like birds. They didn't stay to die with their people. They didn't use their divine power to save the children. They saved themselves. And in that moment, they ceased to be gods. They became merely another species struggling for survival, albeit one with better ships and a colder heart. As we dig through the ruins of the 21st century, what will our successors find? Will they find the records of our own abandonment? Will they see the me of our era, our data centers, our satellites, our digital archives, and wonder why they went silent? The debris field is coming for us too. The great precessional cycle doesn't care about our progress or our politics. It is a grinding gear of the universe, and we are just entering the teeth of the next cog. The question is not whether the gods will return, but whether we have learned enough from their departure to save ourselves this time. The Deep Abzu is waiting. The sensors are twitching. The ancient stasis chambers are beginning to cycle. But the world they left is not the world they will find. They left a biological buffer of broken, terrified survivors. They will return to a global civilization that knows their names, knows their history, and knows exactly how they left us. We have the Planisphere now. We have the lamentation. We have the evidence of the evil wind. And most importantly, we have the realization that we don't need the me to be the masters of our own destiny. The texture of the clay, the glow of the vitrified sand, the impossible weight of the ancient stones. These are the sensory anchors of our true history. They tell a story of a world that was managed, then abandoned, then reclaimed by the very ones who were meant to perish. We are the forgotten earth, and we are finally remembering who we are. We are the ones who stayed. We are the ones who survived the fire that dissolved the soul of the land. And we are the ones who will decide what happens when the kingship tries to descend from heaven once again. The desert wind picks up, swirling the dust into tall, ghostly pillars that dance across the ruins. For a moment, they look like the gods of old, towering figures of sand and shadow. But then the wind dies down and they collapse back into the dunes. They are just dust. Everything is just dust until we give it a name, until we tell its story. The Anunnaki exodus was the end of one story, but it was the beginning of ours. It was the great abandonment that gave us the earth. And as we look at the broken clay of UR, we realize that the most important thing the gods left behind wasn't the me or the ziggurats. It was the planet itself. It was the ground beneath our feet, the air in our lungs, and the fire in our hearts. They left us the ruins, and from those ruins, we have built a world that even the gods might fear. The deep dive into our lost past is not a journey to find our creators. It is a journey to find ourselves. It is an investigation into the trauma that made us who we are. The forbidden hook of the Anunnaki Exodus is that it forces us to confront our own obsolescence and then to transcend it. We were meant to be a buffer, a temporary fix, a mutated experiment. But we became something else. We became the witness. We became the archivist. We became the storyteller. And as long as we keep digging, as long as we keep listening to the silence of the dust, we will never be forgotten again. The stars are the same stars that the scribe tracked on tablet K.8538. The cycle is the same cycle. The debris is still out there, waiting for its turn to intersect with our fragile blue marble. But we are not the same people who sat in the shadow of the ziggurat and wept as the gods fled. We are the ones who know the truth. We are the ones who have seen the evil wind and lived to tell the tale. The Anunnaki may have left their homes like birds of a nest, but we have built a nest that can withstand the storm. We have turned the great abandonment into the great ascension. As the narration fades into the rhythmic hum of the desert night, the viewer is left with a single, haunting image. The me discs, buried deep in the silt of the Euphrates, still glowing with a faint, dying light. They are the artifacts of a world that was never meant for us, but they are also the seeds of the world we have created. We are the inheritors of the abandoned estate, and we are finally ready to unlock the doors. The investigation is not over. It is just beginning. The forgotten earth is waking up, and the story of the great abandonment is finally being told in our own voice. The silence did not remain confined to the mud-brick corridors of Sumer. It rippled outward, a predatory quiet that stalked the trade routes of the ancient world. If we look east, across the jagged peaks of the Zagros and into the lush floodplains of the Indus Valley, we find the same haunting signature of a sudden departure. The people of Meluha, as the Sumerians called them, were the masters of urban planning, the engineers of a standard of living that would not be seen again for millennia. Their cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were not built in a slow, organic crawl. They appeared as if from a blueprint, with grid-patterned streets and sophisticated drainage systems that functioned with the precision of a clock. But in 2000 BC, the clock stopped. The mainstream narrative tells us that the rivers shifted, or that an invasion of nomadic horsemen swept down from the steppes. Yet, when the excavators first uncovered the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, they found something that does not fit the story of a slow decline. They found skeletons lying in the streets, holding hands, huddled in the corners of buildings, as if they were shielding themselves from a flash of light that turned the sky into a furnace. There were no signs of battle, no sword wounds, no evidence of a siege. There was only the sudden, static moment of a world frozen in terror. The vitrification of the brickwork in these cities tells a story that mainstream geology prefers to ignore. In certain sections of the ruins, the very clay of the buildings has been fused into glass, a process that requires a temperature that no primitive hearth or nomadic fire could ever achieve. This is the scientific friction that sparks the forbidden investigation. When we look at these glass-fused walls through the lens of the storm of fire, the mystery dissolves into a terrifying reality. The fire that fell from the sky in Sumer was not a local event. It was a global atmospheric ignition. The debris field that the Anunnaki had seen on their sensors was not a single comet, but a swarm of celestial projectiles, a rain of incandescent stone that tore through the protective layers of our world. And as the gods ascended in their silver craft, they watched from the safety of the upper atmosphere as the cities of their buffer were scorched by the very elements they had been bred to withstand. The evil wind of the Sumerian laments traveled east, carrying the radioactive signature of the gods' departure and the celestial impact. In the Indus Valley, this wind became a lingering ghost. The skeletons found in the streets were not just victims of heat. They were the victims of a biological collapse. Their bones carry a resonance, a heaviness that whispers of a force that bypassed the skin and attacked the marrow. The blood of the gods, that precious genetic heritage that the Anunnaki had shared with their chosen priests and kings, was being systematically purged from the earth by the very environment it was meant to inhabit. This was the moment the experiment turned. This was the moment the Anunnaki realized that their fragile biology could never truly own this planet. They could build the cities, they could write the laws, they could even shape the DNA, but they could not control the precessional gears that periodically reset the stage. If we look at tablet K.8538, another fragment from the shattered library of the past, we find a record of the flickering of the fixed stars. To a modern astronomer, this sounds like a poetic description of atmospheric distortion. But to the archivist of the forgotten Earth, it is a technical observation of a gravitational anomaly. The stars did not flicker because of the air. They flickered because the space between the Earth and the heavens was being warped by the passage of something massive, something that distorted light itself. This was the witness in its most terrifying form. The Anunnaki didn't just see a rock falling. They felt the fabric of their reality being pulled taut. They knew that the Deep Abzu was the only sanctuary left. The Deep Abzu is often spoken of in the texts as a place of infinite waters, a subterranean or primordial ocean. But in the context of a strategic desertion, the Abzu takes on a different texture. It is the vault. It is the stasis chamber. It is the place where the me were stored when the power went out. If you follow the logic of the biological buffer, the Abzu was not a paradise but a bunker. The elite of the Anunnaki did not return to a distant star system. The journey would have been too long, the risks too great. Instead, they retreated into the folds of the earth and the shadows of the moon, entering a state of suspended animation. They became the sleeping giants of our myths, the watchers who closed their eyes as the world burned, waiting for the 1,000-year storm to pass. The sudden silence of the me, around 2000 BC, was the moment the servers were disconnected. The me were not just instructions. They were the interface between the gods and the world. They were the bridge that allowed the kingship to maintain order and prosperity. Without them, the human survivors were left with a profound sense of phantom limb syndrome. We remembered how to build, but we forgot why. We remembered the names of the stars, but we forgot how to talk to them. The technical data storage disks became the holy relics of later religions, objects of worship rather than tools of administration. We turned the blueprints into scriptures and the operators into deities. This was the birth of religion as a trauma response. We created a God-shaped hole in our collective psyche, a void where the Anunnaki once stood with their humming disks and their practical, cold commands. We are told that history is a line, but the evidence suggests it is a circle. The year 2000 BC was a point of intersection, a moment where the golden age of the gods met the iron age of the abandoned. The transition was not peaceful. It was a violent, jagged tear in the continuity of human experience. The strategic desertion left us in a state of arrested development. We were like teenagers whose parents had vanished overnight, leaving us with a mansion we couldn't maintain and a car we didn't have the keys for. We spent the next 4,000 years trying to hotwire the car. We spent our history trying to replicate the me through trial and error, through the slow and painful process of reinventing the wheel that the gods had taken with them. The imagery of the fire that dissolved the soul of the land is particularly haunting when applied to the Mediterranean world. In the ruins of Ebla, in modern-day Syria, the archives of 18,000 clay tablets were found baked into a solid mass of ceramic by a fire that shouldn't have been able to reach such temperatures. The mainstream tells us it was a sack by an invading army. But why would an army stop to bake the library? They wouldn't. The fire was an atmospheric event, a flash of energy that turned the clay of the tablets into a permanent, vitrified record of the world's end. The tablets survived because they were turned to stone by the very disaster they were recording. They are the frozen memory of the abandonment. As we look at the textures of these ancient sites, we must ask ourselves why the weights of the stones are so impossible. In Baalbek, in the mountains of Lebanon, there are foundation stones that weigh over 800 tons. Stones so massive that even our modern machinery struggles to comprehend their movement. We are told they were moved by thousands of slaves using rollers and ropes. But the physics of such a claim dissolves under the slightest pressure. These were not the works of slaves. These were the works of the me. These were the products of a technology that understood the relationship between sound, gravity, and the density of the earth. When the Anunnaki left, they didn't just take the me. They took the knowledge of how to make the world light. They left us in a world of impossible weights, a world where we are tethered to the ground by our own ignorance. The debris field is not a myth. It is an astronomical reality that recurs with the precision of a heartbeat. Our planet is currently drifting through a period of deceptive calm, a buffer zone between the impacts. But the memory of the last one is still etched into our DNA. It is the reason we have a primal fear of the sky. It is the reason every culture on Earth has a story of a great flood or a great fire. We are not afraid of the weather. We are afraid of the return of the witness. We are afraid that the Deep Abzu will open once more, not to save us, but to reclaim what was left behind. The radical theory of the biological buffer suggests that our aggression, our drive to conquer, and our relentless technical curiosity are not human traits at all. They are the mutations caused by the evil wind. We were bred to be compliant, to be the sheepfolds of the gods. But the fire changed us. The radiation of the departure and the celestial impact altered the chemical balance of our minds. It made us restless. It made us paranoid. It made us builders of empires and creators of weapons. We are the mutated DNA that survived the storm by becoming more dangerous than the storm itself. The Anunnaki wanted a workforce. They got a successor species. They wanted a buffer. They got a rival. When the gods fled their nests like birds, they didn't realize they were leaving the keys to the kingdom in the hands of the very creatures they had sought to protect themselves from. They thought we would die out, or that we would remain in a state of perpetual primitive longing. They didn't expect us to turn the fragments of their world into a global civilization. They didn't expect us to look at the me and try to build our own versions of them. Every time we launch a satellite, every time we split the atom, every time we edit a gene, we are performing a ritual of reclamation. We are reclaiming the me that were stolen from us in 2000 BC. The philosophical weight of this realization is immense. If we are the abandoned, then we owe no debt to our creators. We are the masters of the forgotten earth because we are the only ones who stayed to witness its suffering. The Anunnaki are the cowards of history, the ones who chose the Deep Abzu over the responsibility of their creation. Their return would not be a homecoming. It would be an invasion, and the biological buffer they left behind has grown into a shield that they may not be able to penetrate. The slow burn of history is finally reaching its climax. We are approaching the end of the precessional cycle that began with the Great Abandonment. The debris field is once again a factor in our orbital calculations. But this time, we are not looking up with prayers and sacrifices. We are looking up with telescopes and missiles. We are the children of the fire, and we have learned how to harness the very light that once dissolved our souls. The kingship may have left the earth in 2000 BC, but the power stayed behind, hidden in the mud and the memories of the survivors. The archives of the forgotten earth are still being written. Every shovel of dirt in the desert, every scan of the ocean floor, every sequence of the human genome is a new paragraph in the story of the Exodus. We are finding the archive hooks in the most unexpected places, in the recurring patterns of our architecture, in the linguistic echoes of our oldest songs, in the strange scientific friction that occurs when we try to squeeze the past into the narrow boxes of mainstream history. We are finally realizing that we are not the first, and we are not the last. We are just the ones who are currently awake. The deep time of our planet is a record of erasures, but no erasure is ever complete. There is always a smudge, a ghost, a fragment that survives. The lamentation of UR survived. The Planisphere survived. The vitrified stones of Mohenjo-Daro survived. They are the witnesses that refuse to be silenced. They are the evidence of a forbidden investigation that leads us away from the comfort of myth and toward the harsh, cold light of reality. We are the heirs to a shattered empire, and we are finally beginning to understand the value of the wreckage. The archivist's voice is not a voice of authority. but a voice of persistence. It is the voice of those who refuse to forget, even when the world itself is trying to wipe the slate clean. It is the voice that reminds us that the kingship was not a gift, but a burden. It is the voice that tells us that the Deep Abzu is not a sanctuary, but a prison. And it is the voice that whispers that the true story of the Anunnaki is not found in the stars, but in the scars they left on the surface of our world. As we continue to peel back the layers of the past, we must be prepared for what we find. We must be prepared for the realization that our history is not ours alone. We are a part of a much larger, much darker cycle, a cycle of abandonment and return, of fire and silence. But we are not helpless. We are the biological buffer that learned to think for itself. We are the mutation that became a mind. And as the debris field looms once more, we will not flee like birds. We will stand our ground on this forgotten earth, and we will face whatever falls from the sky with the eyes of those who have seen it all before. The textures of the ancient world are calling to us. The glow of the artifacts, the textures of the vitrified brick, the impossible weights of the foundation stones. These are the sensory data points of a lost reality. They are the breadcrumbs left by a civilization that knew it was being erased. They are the technical data storage disks of the physical world. And as we gather them, as we study them, as we learn to read their language, we are finally reclaiming our place in the great processional cycle. We are no longer the victims of the abandonment. We are the protagonists of the survival. The narration continues to flow, a rhythmic and melodic tide of words that seeks to wash away the lies of the mainstream. It is a slow burn, a deep dive into the shadows where the truth has been hiding for 4,000 years. It is an investigation into the forbidden that leads us to the heart of what it means to be human. We are the forgotten earth, but we are finally being remembered. The story of the Anunnaki Exodus is the story of our birth, and we are finally ready to tell it to the end. The desert does not keep secrets. It merely waits. And the wait is almost over. The witness is here. The evil wind is a memory. The Deep Abzu is stirring. And the biological buffer is ready. We are the ones who stayed. We are the ones who survived. And we are the ones who will write the final chapter of the Great Abandonment. The Mediterranean sun beats down on the white bleached stones of the Cyclades, where the ruins of an even older world lie submerged beneath the turquoise waves. Here, too, the signature of the Great Abandonment is found in the sudden cessation of the old ways. Around 2000 BC, the advanced seafaring cultures of the Aegean, those who built the Palace of Knossos and mapped the currents of the Great Sea, suddenly retracted, their ports falling into decay, their trade routes going silent. We are told of a volcanic eruption on Thera, a tsunami that wiped out the Minoans. But the archival hooks suggest a different catalyst. They speak of a darkness that moved across the waters, a shadow that was not cast by a cloud, but by something far larger, something that eclipsed the moon for 3 days and 3 nights. This was the same shadow recorded by the scribes of Sumer, the same witness that prompted the gods to lock their doors and activate their ascent protocols. The scientific friction here is found in the metallurgical anomalies of the period. In the layer of the Earth corresponding to the year 2000 BC, we find a sudden drop in the quality of bronze. The me of metallurgy, the technical knowledge of how to smelt and alloy metals with precision, seems to have been revoked. It wasn't that the people forgot how to do it. It was that the catalysts were gone. The texts from the era speak of the divine fire being taken back to the mountain of the gods. If we interpret this fire as a high-tech energy source, perhaps a portable reactor or a plasma-based smelting tool, the strategic desertion becomes a physical reality. The Anunnaki didn't just leave us with the mud bricks. They took the power tools. They left the craftsmen of the Aegean with their molds and their bellows, but without the me that allowed them to reach the temperatures required for the true bronze of the Golden Age. The imagery of the blood of gods diluted by time becomes literal when we look at the royal lineages of the post-2000 BC world. In the Hittite Empire, in the kingdoms of the Levant, and in the early dynasties of Egypt, we see a frantic obsession with blood purity. The kings and queens of these eras were desperate to maintain a connection to the divine line that had just abandoned them. They married their sisters, They performed elaborate rituals of genetic preservation, and they built massive tombs to house their bodies, hoping that the gods would return and find their pure vessels waiting for them. But the dilution was already underway. The biological buffer was absorbing the elite DNA, mixing it with the rugged, mutated strains of the survivors. The kingship was becoming a human institution, a shadow of the technical administration it had once been. The Deep Abzu is not just a place, it is a state of being. If the Anunnaki retreated into stasis, they did so knowing that their return would be a calculated move. They would wait until the debris field had cleared and the Earth's magnetic field had stabilized. But they also knew that their absence would create a vacuum. This vacuum was filled by the mutated humanity, a species that was no longer content to be the sheepfold. We began to build our own ziggurats, not as landing pads for the gods, but as fortresses for ourselves. We began to weaponize the fragments of their technology, turning the me of the forge into the me of the sword. The strategic desertion was the catalyst for the human warrior culture. We became violent because we were abandoned. We became defensive because we knew the evil wind could return at any moment. The archive hooks of the 2000 BC period are found in the strange, repetitive motifs of the winged disc that appear in every major civilization. To the mainstream, this is a symbol of the sun or a metaphor for divine protection. But in the context of the forgotten earth, the winged disc is the witness. It is the visual memory of the craft that carried the gods away. It is the life raft of the elite, etched into stone by the people who were left behind. The wings are not feathers. They are the plumes of energy, the distortion of the atmosphere as the craft tore through the sky. The disc is the physical object, the silver cocoon of the Deep Abzu. We see it in Egypt, in Assyria, in Persia, and in the Americas. It is the universal logo of the Great Abandonment. The scientific friction of the 2000 BC era is also present in the sudden silence of the astronomical records. For millennia, the ancients had maintained a calendar of startling precision, tracking the 26,000-year cycle of the precession. And then, around the time of the Exodus, the calendars begin to drift. The observations become less precise, the mathematics more clumsy. It is as if the calculators were removed from the room. We are told this was due to the collapse of the priestly class, but it is more likely that the technical data storage disks, the me of the heavens, were no longer accessible. The humans were left to eyeball the stars, trying to remember the complex orbital ratios that the gods had once fed them through the interface of the temple. The textures of the world changed after the abandonment. The glow was gone. The ancient texts speak of a time when the temples shone like the sun, and the cities were bathed in a divine light. This wasn't just poetic license. This was a description of a world powered by a technology we no longer possess. After 2000 BC, the world became dark. The cities were lit by oil lamps and fire. The impossible weights were no longer moved. The technical data storage disks were hidden or destroyed. We entered the long night of the human experience, a night where we had to learn how to see in the dark. The biological buffer theory explains why we are so obsessed with return. Every religion, every mythology, every science fiction story is a variation on the same theme: the return of the masters, the return of the light, the return of the golden age. We are hardwired to wait for the Anunnaki to come back and fix what they broke. But the radical truth is that they didn't break it. They just left it. They saw the debris field coming, and they decided that we weren't worth the effort. They left us to face the evil wind alone, believing that if we survived, we would be a better, more resilient version of what they had created. We were a genetic investment that they intended to harvest at a later date. The Deep Abzu is stirring. The 2000 BC cycle is coming around again. The witness is back in our sky, though we call it by different names now. We are detecting the same flickering of the fixed stars that the Sumerians recorded on tablet K.8538. The scientific friction is heating up as our modern telescopes find objects that don't fit the standard models of celestial mechanics. We are approaching the next point of intersection, the next storm of fire. But this time, the biological buffer is ready. We have spent the last 4,000 years preparing for this moment, even if we didn't know it. We have built our own me. We have decoded the blood of the gods in our own labs. We have learned to move the impossible weights with our own machines. The strategic desertion of 2000 BC was a tragedy for those who lived through it, but it was the making of those who followed. It forced us to become our own gods. It forced us to look at the forbidden and find the truth. The forgotten earth is no longer forgotten. We are peeling back the silt. We are vitrifying the lies, and we are finally seeing the archivist's voice for what it is. The voice of a species that refused to be a footnote in someone else's history. The narration continues its rhythmic crawl through the wreckage of the past. It is a slow burn that ignites the imagination and incinerates the comfortable narratives of the mainstream. We are the survivors of the Great Abandonment, and we are finally reclaiming our sovereignty. The kingship may have left the earth, but the earth is still here, and it belongs to us. We are the ones who stood in the evil wind and didn't fall. We are the ones who watched the witness and didn't blink. And we are the ones who will be waiting when the Deep Abzu finally opens its doors. The textures of the ruins are the braille of our true history. We must learn to read them with our hands, with our hearts, with our deep-time instincts. We must look at the glow of the artifacts and see the technology. We must look at the impossible weights and see the physics. We must look at the sudden silence and hear the truth. The story of the Anunnaki is not a story of gods and men. It is a story of a strategic retreat and a biological resilience. It is a story of an exodus and an inheritance. The desert wind is cold now, carrying the scent of rain and ancient dust. The pillars of sand have fallen, but the memory of the witness remains. We are the forgotten earth, and we are finally coming home to ourselves. The investigation is far from over, but the direction is clear. We are no longer looking for our creators in the stars. We are finding them in our own reflection, in the mutated DNA that survived the fire and built a world from the ashes. The Great Abandonment was not the end. It was the beginning of the human era. And as the precessional gears turn once more, we are ready to take our place as the true masters of the cycle. The rhythmic, melodic flow of the narration is a hypnotic spell that breaks the trance of the mainstream. It is a deep dive into the forbidden that reveals the beauty of the betrayal. We were left to die and we lived. We were left to forget and we remembered. We were left to be a buffer and we became a force. The Anunnaki Exodus was the ultimate challenge, and the forgotten earth is the ultimate answer. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows over the ruins of Nippur, the silence returns. But it is a different silence now. It is not the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of preparation. The Deep Abzu is waking up. The witness is watching. The evil wind is rising. And we are here, standing on the foundations of the old world, ready to build the new one. The narration fades, but the investigation continues. The story of the forgotten earth is just getting started, and the truth is finally within our reach. The shadow of the Great Abandonment did not stop at the edge of the great oceans. It stretched across the dark expanse of the Pacific, reaching the humid jungles of the Mesoamerican coast where the Olmecs, the rubber people, suddenly emerged from the mists of history. Like the Sumerians, they did not crawl toward civilization. They arrived at it, fully formed, carrying the same technical blueprints of architecture and astronomy that had defined the old world. The colossal basalt heads, weighing 20 tons each, stare out at us from the jungle floor with an expression of stoic, ancient grief. They are not the faces of the jungle dwellers. They are the portraits of the elite, the ones who held the me before the silence fell. When you touch the cold, dark stone of these monuments, you are touching the same scientific friction found in the ziggurats of UR. How were they moved? How were they carved with such impossible precision without the tools of the forge? The answer is the same. The Guardians were here, and then, in the year 2000 BC, they were gone. The transition in the Americas was just as jagged, just as violent. The Olmec heartland shows the same signatures of a sudden, forced departure. Ritual centers were defaced, not by enemies, but by the residents themselves, as if they were trying to erase the memory of the ones who had left them. The scientific friction in the New World is the lack of a precursor. There are no primitive Olmec sites. There is no slow development of the calendar. One day the jungle was silent, and the next, it was home to a people who could track the cycles of Venus with the precision of an atomic clock. And then, as the 2000 BC deadline approached, the elite withdrew. They left the colossal heads as markers, silent sentinels guarding an empty house. We must consider the possibility that the me were not merely external devices, not just clay or metal discs stored in temple vaults. They were biological interfaces. The blood of the gods was the hardware, a specific genetic sequence that acted as a receiver for the higher frequencies of the Anunnaki technology. The me were the software, the data packets that could be uploaded into the mind of a high priest or a king through the biological link of their lineage. When the Anunnaki fled, they didn't just take the physical discs. They deactivated the connection within the human genome. This is why we feel a phantom limb in our collective consciousness. We are the hardware that has been disconnected from the network. Our DNA still carries the ports, the dormant sequences, the ghosts in the marrow that were once capable of receiving the direct transmissions of the Celestial Administrative Center. The Great Abandonment was a lobotomy of the species. We were left with the physical capacity for greatness, but without the me to direct it. This is why the post-2000 BC world is defined by a frantic, almost neurotic building of monuments. We were trying to jumpstart the connection. We were building ziggurats and pyramids as massive antennas, hoping to catch a stray signal from the Deep Abzu. We were performing sacrifices, hoping that the scent of blood, that diluted genetic material, would act as a beacon to bring the technicians back to the lab. But the heavens remained silent. The evil wind had done its work, and the guardians had moved beyond the reach of our primitive cries. The biological buffer was more than just a shield. It was a filtration system. The Anunnaki knew that the debris field would bring with it a wave of cosmic radiation and atmospheric instability that would degrade their refined biology. By leaving us behind, they allowed the human form to act as a crucible. We took the brunt of the evil wind. We absorbed the mutations. We endured the storm of fire. And in doing so, we purified the planet. We are the ones who filtered the toxicity of the 2000 BC event through our own bodies, generation after generation, until the Earth was habitable for the elite once more. We are the planetary janitors, left to clean up the radioactive wreckage of a celestial disaster while the masters slept in their silver cocoons. The Deep Abzu is a concept that haunts the edges of our understanding. It is often described as a place of darkness and water, but in the language of the forgotten Earth, it is a place of absolute stillness. Whether it is a facility buried miles beneath the ice of Antarctica or a series of pods orbiting the Lagrange points of our moon, the Abzu is the place where time stopped for the Anunnaki. While we were fighting wars and building empires and discovering electricity, they were in the cold, dark stasis of the elite. They weren't aging. They weren't evolving. They were waiting. They were waiting for the me to flicker back to life. They were waiting for the witness to clear the horizon. But there is a flaw in their plan, a scientific friction they did not account for. The Earth erases its history, yes, but it also creates new ones. In the 4,000 years of their absence, the mutated DNA of humanity has developed its own sovereignty. We have created our own me. Our internet is the new network. Our silicon chips are the new disks. Our CRISPR technology is the new blood of the gods. We are no longer the sheepfold they left behind. We are a global technological entity that has filled the vacuum they created. When the Anunnaki wake up, they will find that the biological buffer has developed a mind of its own. The textures of the ruins are becoming clearer as we approach the final hour of our investigation. The vitrified sand of the Gobi Desert, the fused stones of the Scottish vitrified forts, the glass-scarred landscapes of the American Southwest. These are the terrestrial markers of the storm of fire that accompanied the Exodus. They are the scars of a planet that was used as a shield. The Anunnaki didn't just leave. They used the Earth's atmosphere as a sacrificial layer to protect their departure. The evil wind was the wake of their ships, the ozone-shattering price of their escape. We are told that the year 2000 BC was just another year in the Bronze Age. But the archivist sees it as the year the Earth was orphaned. The sudden silence was a global phenomenon, a moment when the lights of civilization were dimmed by a hand we were never supposed to see. The lamentation over the destruction of UR is the foundational text of our era, the first record of the realization that we are alone. The gods have abandoned us like birds of a nest. This is the core truth of the human condition. We are the abandoned. We are the ones who were left in the fire. The philosophical weight of the forgotten earth is the realization that we are not the protagonists of a divine plan, but the survivors of a strategic desertion. This realization is melancholic, but it is also liberating. If there are no gods watching over us, then there are no gods to tell us what to do. If the me were stolen, then we have the right to invent our own. If the kingship was taken back to heaven, then we have the right to build our own authority. The great abandonment was the end of our childhood and the beginning of our struggle for adulthood. The slow burn of history is reaching its final phase. The precessional cycle is turning. The debris field is once again visible on our long-range sensors. The witness is returning. But this time, we are not looking up with terror. We are looking up with understanding. We see the trajectory. We see the scientific friction. We see the archival hooks that connect us to the year 2000 BC. And we know that this time, the biological buffer will not be a passive shield. The Earth remembers its masters, but it also remembers its survivors. The dust of the desert, the silt of the rivers, the frozen layers of the poles. They all hold the evidence of the day the heavens went silent. We are the ones who found the fragments. We are the ones who pieced together the story. We are the forgotten Earth. And we are finally ready to face the deep time of our own existence. The textures of the ancient world are fading now, replaced by the neon and steel of the modern age. But beneath the surface, the old power still hums. The me are still there, hidden in our DNA, waiting for the right frequency to be reactivated. The Deep Abzu is stirring, the cooling systems of the stasis pods groaning as the external sensors detect the approach of the next cycle. The Guardians are waking up, but the world they are waking up to is a world of 7 billion mutants who have learned how to harness the stars for themselves. The narration slows to a melodic, rhythmic crawl. The words are heavy with the weight of the thousands of years they describe. We are the echoes of a world that was never meant to be ours. We are the orphans of the Anunnaki, but we are also the heirs to the planet. The great abandonment was a crime, but it was also a gift. It gave us the freedom of the forgotten. It gave us the sovereignty of the abandoned. And as we stand on the ruins of the 21st century, looking back at the ruins of 2000 BC, we realize that we are the only ones who can decide if the story of the forgotten Earth is a tragedy or a triumph. The silence is returning, but it is a silence of peace, not of terror. The investigation is closing. The archive hooks are secure. The scientific friction has been addressed. The deep time of the Anunnaki exodus is no longer a forbidden secret, but a shared memory. We are the forgotten Earth, and we are finally home. The fire fell, the wind blew, and the gods fled, but we remained. And that, in the end, is the only thing that matters. We remained. The deep dive into the lost past has brought us back to the present, to the moment where the cycle begins again. The witness is in the sky. The Deep Abzu is open. The me are humming in our pockets. The story is complete, but the history is just starting. We are the forgotten Earth, and we are no longer afraid of the dark. We are the light that stayed behind when the sun went out. We are the memory that refused to be erased. We are the humanity that survived the gods. The desert does not keep secrets. It merely waits. And the wait is over. The kingship is here, but it doesn't belong to the stars. It belongs to the ones who stayed in the fire. It belongs to us. The salt-heavy currents of the deep Atlantic hold the same resonance of abandonment, a cold, pressurized silence that mirrors the vacuum of space. If we descend into the bathypelagic zones, far beyond the reach of the sun's warmth, we find the remnants of structures that defy the slow crawl of continental drift. These are the foundations of the Deep Abzu in its aquatic aspect, the subterranean cooling systems and oceanic relays that once processed the planetary heat for the Anunnaki's energy grids. Around 2000 BC, these thermal vents did not just shut down, they were cauterized. The sonar signatures of these ruins reveal a geometric precision that mimics the ziggurats of the desert, but they are coated in a layer of manganese that suggests a sudden, high-energy termination. It is as if the gods, in their haste to leave, did not just turn off the lights, they melted the switches. They left the oceans to reclaim the machinery, burying the heart of their terrestrial power under miles of crushing, dark water. We are told that the oceans are the last frontier, a mystery of biology and pressure. But the archivist sees them as a graveyard of technical hubris. The Me were not limited to the land. They were the regulatory systems for the tides, the currents, and the very thermal balance of the world. When the data storage disks were removed or deactivated during the Great Abandonment, the Earth's climate did not just shift, it revolted. The storm of fire on land was matched by a chaos of water in the deep. The currents that had been stabilized by the Anunnaki's Me began to wobble, triggering the sudden, erratic weather patterns that we now call the Mid-Holocene transition. We are living in the wreckage of a managed planet that was suddenly forced to return to its wild, chaotic state. We are the survivors of a thermostat that was smashed in a moment of panic. Consider the linguistic fall, that sudden fracturing of the human tongue that the ancients recorded as the Tower of Babel. In the context of the Me, this was not a divine punishment for human pride. It was a technical breakdown of a unified communication protocol. The Me provided the interface, a shared cognitive frequency that allowed the sheepfold to understand the commands of the shepherds with absolute clarity. It was a biological Wi-Fi, a neural synchronization that kept the workforce cohesive and efficient. When the Anunnaki withdrew their influence and deactivated the central relays, the network crashed. The unified language was not a spoken tongue. It was a data stream. Without the Me to decode the signals, the human brain was left to its own local processing, resulting in the sudden, jarring emergence of 1,000 different dialects. We didn't stop speaking the same language. We lost the ability to hear the frequency. The scientific friction of our linguistics is found in the root languages that appear out of nowhere, with complex grammars that seem to have no evolutionary predecessor. These are the fragments of the lost protocol, the broken code that we have spent 4,000 years trying to patch back together. Our poetry, our songs, our desperate attempts to find the perfect word. These are the echoes of the neural synchronization we lost in 2000 BC. We are a species of mutes trying to remember a symphony. We are the hardware that still feels the phantom itch of a connection that was severed by a cold, distant hand. The radical theory of the biological buffer reaches its most unsettling conclusion when we look at our own modern technological trajectory. Why is our civilization so obsessed with silicon, with data density, with the creation of artificial intelligence? It is not a natural progression. It is an instinctual compulsion. We are subconsciously rebuilding the Me. Our modern servers are the new temple vaults. Our fiber optic cables are the new neural relays. Our obsession with the cloud is a genetic memory of the orbital network that the Anunnaki used to govern the world. We are not inventing technology. We are remembering it. We are reconstructing the environment of the gods, preparing the buffer for the return of the masters who left us to burn. We are the lab rats who have learned how to build the maze, waiting for the scientists to walk back into the room. The Deep Abzu is no longer a myth of the past. It is the blueprint of our future. The stasis pods that the elite retreated into are not just relics. They are the goal. Every billionaire seeking to freeze their body, every scientist working on life extension, every dreamer looking toward the colonization of the moon, they are all acting out the script of the Great Abandonment. We are trying to become the elite who left us. We are trying to earn our way into the Deep Abzu, to escape the next storm of fire by becoming the very things that abandoned us. This is the ultimate irony of the forgotten Earth. We have turned our betrayal into our ambition. We have made the cowardice of the Anunnaki our highest ideal. But the Earth is a patient witness, and it holds a different fate for the mutated DNA that stayed behind. The Anunnaki fled because they were fragile. They fled because they could not survive the chaos of a planet in transition. We, however, are the products of that chaos. We are the ones who were forged in the evil wind. Our biology is not pure, but it is robust. We are the weeds that have learned to eat the radiation and drink the salt. When the gods wake up from their thousand-year stasis, they will find a world that is fundamentally hostile to their refined senses. They will find a world that has been occupied by a species that thrives on the very friction they feared. The imagery of the blood of gods diluted by time is not a lament. It is a declaration of independence. With every generation, the pure genetic sequences of the Anunnaki are further integrated into the resilient, chaotic human genome. We are not losing the power, we are grounding it. We are turning the celestial into the terrestrial. The me that were once the exclusive tools of the elite are now being democratized through the sheer force of our numbers and our curiosity. We are the biological buffer that has achieved critical mass. We are the shield that has become a sword. The philosophical melancholy of our investigation is the realization that the return may be the final disappointment. What if the Anunnaki return not as glorious kings, but as brittle ghosts? What if the Deep Abzu has preserved them, but the world has moved beyond them? They would be like the last survivors of a sinking ship, finally reaching the shore only to find that the sheepfold has built a fortress on the sand. The great abandonment was their escape, but it was also their exile. By leaving us, they disconnected themselves from the source of the Earth's true power, the power of evolution, of adaptation, of survival through the fire. The textures of the forgotten Earth are the textures of a world that has grown up. The ruins of UR, the glass-fused walls of Mohenjo-Daro, the colossal basalt heads of the Olmecs. These are our childhood toys, discarded by parents who were afraid of the storm. We have outgrown them. We have built our own cities, written our own laws, and mapped our own stars. The scientific friction of the year 2000 BC is the record of our birth as a sovereign species. It was the day the kingship was not given, but taken. The narration slows to its final, hypnotic rhythm. The words are like the steady beat of a drum in the deep dark. We are the forgotten Earth. We are the survivors of the strategic desertion. We are the mutation that became a mind. The Anunnaki may have seen the debris field and fled, but we saw the debris and we learned how to catch it. We saw the evil wind and we learned how to breathe it. We saw the silence of the me and we learned how to speak for ourselves. The investigation into the lost past is reaching its limit, but the investigation into the future is just beginning. The archive hooks have been set. The scientific friction has been explored. The sensory details of our abandonment have been recorded for all time. We are the witnesses who refused to die. We are the ones who stood in the light of the storm of fire and didn't dissolve. And as the precessional cycle turns once more, as the witness returns to the sky and the Deep Abzu begins to hum with the energy of awakening, we will not fall to our knees in prayer. We will stand on the mounds of our ancient cities, holding the me we have built with our own hands, and we will look the gods in the eye. We will show them the scars of the evil wind. We will show them the strength of the biological buffer. And we will tell them that the kingship didn't leave the earth in 2000 BC. It just changed hands. It became the inheritance of those who stayed behind. It became the soul of the forgotten earth. The desert wind is dying down now, the sand settling over the ruins once again. The pillars of smoke have vanished. The fire has cooled. The stars are silent, watching the earth with a cold, distant gaze. But here on the ground, the lights are on. The me are humming. The mutants are awake. The great abandonment is over, and the great rebirth is underway. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the answer to the silence. The rhythmic, melodic flow of the storyteller's voice fades into the background, leaving the viewer with the lingering texture of the ancient clay and the modern steel. The forgotten earth is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a reality to be lived. The deep dive is complete. The investigation is closed. The truth is etched in the marrow of our bones, a genetic record of the day the gods left and we remained. We are the forgotten earth, and we are finally, beautifully, undeniably alone. The final image is not one of a craft in the sky, but of a hand, a human hand, reaching down into the dust of UR and picking up a broken piece of clay. On it, the cuneiform signs for star and earth are still visible, blurred by 4,000 years of wind and rain. The hand closes around the fragment, a gesture of ownership, of memory, of resilience. The screen fades to the deep, velvet black of the Abzu, but the sound of the wind continues, a long, slow exhale that sounds like a name. Our name. The cycle continues. The witness moves in its orbit. The debris field waits. But we are here. We have always been here. And we are not going anywhere. The story of the Anunnaki Exodus is not a story of what we lost, but of what we became. We became the masters of the wreckage. We became the architects of the silence. We became the forgotten earth. And in the end, that is more than enough. The textures of the world, the glow, the weight, the scent of ozone, they all converge in this final moment of realization. We are not a footnote in the history of the gods. They are the prologue to the history of us. The 2000 BC event was not the end of our world. It was the end of their ownership. We are the biological buffer that broke its chains. We are the mutation that inherited the stars. The investigation is over. The forgotten earth is finally remembered. The narration ends as it began, with a whisper that is lost in the desert wind. A whisper that carries the weight of 40 centuries, the weight of 1,000 fallen temples, and the weight of 1 billion lives lived in the shadow of the abandonment. It is a whisper of peace. It is a whisper of power. It is the whisper of a species that has finally found its own voice in the silence of the gods. We are home. We are whole. We are free. The deep time perspective reveals that the earth is not a static place, but a living, breathing entity that periodically sheds its skin. The Anunnaki were just one layer of that skin, a layer that grew thin and brittle and eventually peeled away in the fire of 2000 BC. We are the new skin, the tough, resilient layer that has grown over the scars. We are the current state of the forgotten earth, and we are as beautiful and as terrifying as the cycle itself. The story is told. The archivist is silent. The Deep Abzu is just a memory, and the stars are just lights in the sky.